It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Well, the Mets won a series. That's a positive. The Mets lose in, really beat the crap out of themselves fashion to the Minnesota Twins on a sunny Wednesday afternoon at Citi Field. They lose. Luis Severino decides to throw batting practice in the second inning. Was it the second inning? No, it was the third inning in which he threw batting practice. And the New York Mets cannot sweep the Minnesota Twins. They win 2 out of 3. Overall, it was an okay homestand. 2-2 against Atlanta, 2-1 against Minnesota. Obviously, if you look back at the Yankees series, 2-0 against the Yankees. Overall, since the All-Star break, the Mets are 8-5. We'll talk a little bit about this finale against Minnesota, some of the concerns that may come out of it, some more thoughts on the trade deadline, a lot of your thoughts on the trade deadline, as we'll open up the Rico Brogna mailbag at the ricob@gmail.com. And we'll look ahead to this West Coast trip. But we thank you for downloading and subscribing to Rico Brogna. So Wednesday afternoon, I was in the building. We had a little SNY Sweet Day. So Tiki was there. I was there. Morash was there. Positive Tommy was there. And it was, the food was good, but it was not a positive experience. And I thought about this as I was preparing my scorecard, because you're damn right I'm going to score this game, even in the bougie confounds of the SNY suite. I'm writing down Luis Severino's numbers. I get to 120 and 2/3 innings, 103 hits, 94 strikeouts, 42 walks. I look at his career numbers, and then I start to look in front of me at his numbers last year, his numbers the year before, the numbers the year before that, and it does jump out at you that Luis Severino is now in uncharted territory in terms of innings pitched. Like, we have not seen Luis Severino pitch as much as he's pitched this year in a very, very long time. And there has to be a level of concern. And I was thinking about this, obviously, before he struggled. Not that I assumed he was going to struggle, but that it is so not what he's done in a long time. Like last year, he threw 89 innings, and he was terrible, obviously, everyone who remembers it. He was unpitchable for a part of the year, and then he suffered from an injury that ended his year as it looked like he was putting it together. The year before that, he pitched well, but again, only made 19 starts, 102 innings. The year before that, he only threw 6 innings. The year before that, he did not pitch. The year before that, he threw 12 innings. So you've got to go all the way back to 2018 when he had a full 191 and a third inning season. That is 7 years ago, or 6 years ago. I don't want to add math to it. 6 years ago. So there is, to me at least, a level of concern about Luis Severino moving forward. Like, what is he going to be now that he's in this uncharted territory? And it's been an interesting year. Excuse me. It's been an interesting year for Sevy in that it's not like he's been unhittable. He's actually, walked 3 guys per 9. His strikeouts are way down. He's kind of relied on his defense making plays behind him. His FIP is higher than his ERA, which shows you he's pitched to a little bit of luck. And this performance against Minnesota was kind of that warning sign. His velocity was down, which I didn't notice at the game. I heard about that after the fact. But his velocity was down, especially in the third inning when he gave up hit after hit after hit. He gave up 5 consecutive hits to start that third inning, including that 2-run home run to Matt Wallner, who pitched earlier in this series when the Mets were beating up Minnesota. Gives up the home run to Byron Buxton. It was deflating because when he gives up the home run to Buxton and the Mets are down 1-0, they instantly responded. I mean, Mark Vientos went oppo taco for a 2-run home run, which excited me and made me think, well, maybe they will be able to sweep them. And I looked at that third inning as an important shutdown inning for Severino, and my God, was it the opposite. I mean, it was a disaster. 5 straight hits, multiple stolen bases in which Francisco Alvarez had a very difficult time just transferring the ball and making a clean throw. He gives up the home run to Wallner. He's able to get through the rest of the inning. And quite frankly, I think Mendy made the right call pulling him because A, you can use your entire bullpen knowing you had an off day on Thursday, and there's a couple of guys that you want to throw into the action, and a couple of guys that haven't pitched in a while. But also, I didn't expect it was going to get much better for Sevy. So it was a real crappy performance by him. And I think when you combine, sure, the velocity being down, but more than that, just the uncharted territory of where he is, I think it's fair not to panic, but to at least say, hey, I wonder what Sevy's going to be over the last 10 starts of the year. Because we're kind of in that range, if you do the math, that he and everyone else probably has about 10 starts left in them. Just like when you make a trade and you trade for a starting pitcher, that's what you're trading for. You're trading for 10 regular season starts in all likelihood. Obviously, you make the playoffs, it can be very, very different. So keep an eye on Sevy, especially the next time he takes the mound, which is scheduled to be in Colorado against the Rockies. Can he bounce back from what was really a dreadful performance? He has not pitched badly recently by any stretch. He pitched solidly against Atlanta. He had the 6 scoreless against Miami. Before the All-Star break, he was okay, pitching into the 7th inning against the Nationals. So he had actually put together a pretty good stretch of games since that Pittsburgh disaster. But I think where he is innings-wise, it's fair to at least wonder, okay, what is he? But look, when you think about this loss to Minnesota on a Wednesday afternoon, and I know it's easy to say, what do you expect? They're going to sweep them. Twins are a good team. They're in the playoffs right now in the American League. Like, it'd have been nice to sweep them. It's not a disaster that they haven't, but I always look at every game individually, and this offense did nothing. And this offense coming out of the All-Star break has been very inconsistent. They've given you some monster performances like they did in the first game of the Minnesota series, of this series. But you look at game 2, they won a game 2-0 because they pitched incredibly well. You look at this game on a Wednesday afternoon, they scored 3 runs, one of them coming, with 2 outs in the 9th inning on an RBI ground out. The offense did very, very little. Tone was set for the game when Lindor led off by hitting a ball that went over the fence, and Trevor Larnach brought it back with that great leaping catch. You had the 2-run home run by Vientos, which followed like a very typical Jeff McNeil base hit where he threw his bat at it, kind of plucked it in the left field. But after that, and credit to Minnesota, they made some great defensive plays. You saw that great diving catch in right field by Max Kepler on a fly ball by Francisco Alvarez. But they couldn't figure out Jorge Lopez, a guy the Mets have had great success against, especially from his days in Miami. So it's easy to kill Sevy, and that's where we started because he was bad, and it's certainly worthy of keeping an eye on him with the innings as high as it is. But the offense did nothing. It's kind of like those last 2 games against Atlanta. They didn't hit. Get a 2-run home run by Mark Vientos. After that, they had very few opportunities, very few run-scoring chances. Lindor bounced into a double play in the 5th inning. Pete Alonso came up in the 6th with a runner on, 1 out. Here's a chance to try to get back in the game down 7-2. It's funny. When Alonso came up in the 8th inning, they were 2 on and 2 out. And at that point, they were down 8-2. And I'm still there. I'm hanging in there. Don't leave games early, even when I drag my wife to it. And my boss, one of my bosses, turns around because he knows the way a lot of you guys think. And he says, so, Ev, you think Pete hits a meaningless 3-run home run right here? And I looked at him and I said, okay, it's 8-2 in the 8th inning. I understand. Feels like a meaningless home run. If he hits a 3-run home run, it's 8-5. I mean, it's not that meaningless. It makes it a baseball game. It puts a little bit of pressure on Johan Duran if he's going to come in the 9th inning to try to save this game. So I don't look at that as meaningless. Unfortunately, Pete Alonso grounded out. So he did nothing in this game. Really, nobody did anything in this game other than Mark Vientos, who hit the 2-run home run. The concern about Brandon Nimmo fouled the ball off his leg. Then he came out of the game. Look, it seems like Brandon Nimmo's had a lot of little nagging injuries, and luckily, I knock on wood when I say this, he has not missed any amount of time, but boy, he's not hitting. We talk about the offense being inconsistent, especially coming out of the All-Star break. And a part of why it's been inconsistent is him. He's certainly one of the guys. Pete had a quiet night today or this afternoon, but Pete's hit coming out of the break. Brandon Nimmo has seen his batting average dip all the way down to like 230, 229. Still drawing some walks, still getting on base. I'm not ready necessarily to make a lineup change. We saw Mendy have Iglesias batting second a couple of times. But one thing we're seeing, despite Iglesias being in the lineup against Pablo Lopez on Wednesday, is we're seeing a lot more Jesse Winker. And we're not complaining about it because he's clearly better than DJ Stewart. But Winker playing right field and McNeil hitting, so McNeil has clearly earned those at-bats again, is sort of sending Iglesias back to the bench. And I think that we're going to see more of that because Jesse Winker is a better offensive player than Jose Iglesias. And as well as Jose has played, he did have a double in this game. It was late, 1 for 4, still with some really good stats. I think the assumption is, Iglesias is really going to get back to his career numbers, which is respectable, by the way. He's actually better offensively than a lot of people give him credit for. But I think the Jose Iglesias playing every day train is going to slow down with Jesse Winker being here. I think that when there are lefties on the mound, he's certainly going to play. Not at the loss of Jeff McNeil, but more at the loss of Jesse Winker. It does feel like Starling Marte could actually come back. We got an update from Carlos Mendoza that he is traveling with the team to California, and he very well could begin a rehab assignment coming up late next week. That's huge. I will tell you, though, about Marte. And remember, Marte was hitting before he got hurt. It was the defense that was a big issue with him. I don't know if I'm in a rush to play him every single day upon return. Doesn't mean I would bench him completely. I give him an opportunity to win the right field job back. And he's certainly one of those guys at 35 years old with a long injury history now that you're not playing him every day anyway. But he comes back. I'm not playing him every single day. And to the point I'm making about sitting him once a week, maybe more than that, especially if Jesse Winker is going to be productive. I mean, they've already thrown him at the 5th hole in the lineup, and he's off to a pretty good start. They've handled him kind of with care. He doesn't start the finale of the series against Lopez. They took him out for defense after like 30 seconds in the first game of this series. But I think Marte coming back, great addition. Certainly excited to have him back. And it's an easy roster transaction. See you later, Ben Gamel. Thank you for your time. But I would almost look at him as an every other day kind of player. If he starts hitting, if he hits a lot, okay, that will change things. You play people if they hit. But offensively, the Mets did nothing in this game. They have been very quiet coming out of the All-Star break. And let's not get this twisted. If the New York Mets are going to make the playoffs, and it is not easy, because right now you're seeing all these National League peer-tier wildcard teams basically win every single day and pull games out of their arses. The Padres came back the other night. The Diamondbacks had a crazy comeback the other night. So the Mets are, it ain't easy. Despite the winning recently and winning 2 out of 3 against Minnesota, they find themselves out of a playoff spot. It can happen that quickly. But if this team is going to win, if this team is going to be successful and win enough games over the final, what are we down to? 54 games of the regular season, this offense has to lead them. It ain't the starting pitching. It ain't the revamped bullpen. It ain't the brilliant wit of Carlos Mendoza. It's this offense. They have to score runs consistently, and it has been very inconsistent coming out of the All-Star break. And then you get a game like Monday, the opener of this series, that, changes those numbers completely because you put up 15 runs. So it makes it seem like the Mets had a great offensive series. Oh, wait, they scored 20 runs in 3 games against Minnesota. Yeah, they scored 15 of them in the first game of the series. It's why sometimes stats can be misleading. But I'm not disheartened. It sucks to lose. I think what makes the losing a little bit more difficult, and maybe this is unhealthy, but I've been doing this since May, as you guys know if you're a loyal Rico listener. I will scoreboard watch very quickly. I don't waste any time. I think about playoff races. I think about tiebreakers, as lame as that is. I think about that stuff very, very early on. And sometimes how your opponents do impact how you feel. And right now, like I described, these teams in the National League, these peer-tier teams, are winning. They're winning consistently. Now you look up and here are the Diamondbacks at 58 and 51, holding on and beating the Nationals. I watched the last few minutes of that game after I got home from the Met game. Nationals had the bases loaded, one out. They had a great opportunity in a 5-3 game to come back against Arizona. They came up a run short. I'm keeping an eye on Atlanta, who beat the Brewers 6-2. I'm looking for help from David Stearns' former team. We don't get it. Look, it's all in front of the Mets. I hate to quote Aaron Boone, but it's true. Especially those head-to-head games that they're going to have against the San Diego Padres and the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I get made fun of for caring about tiebreakers. And you know what? These tiebreakers may be a big deal. And by the way, if you're thinking about that San Diego-Arizona big matchup, it's at the end of August. So we've got another month. The Mets in the month of August, and I knew it, but it jumped out at me. I was walking out of the ballpark today, Wednesday afternoon, if you're listening live, and they flashed the August schedule on the TV. And I looked at the schedule. I pointed it out to my wife. I said, look, you see, I'm not going to be at Citi Field a lot in August because they're barely there. Here's the schedule if you haven't thought about it or you don't know it. They're about to go on this 10-game road trip that takes them to 4 cities. They go to Anaheim. And granted, this road trip is not against some great teams by any stretch. They have 3 games in Anaheim, a single game in St. Louis, 3 games in Colorado, 3 games in Seattle. Then they come home, and yes, they have a 9-game homestand against Oakland, Miami, and Baltimore. That's their only home games in the month of August. Then the big one, 4 games in San Diego against the red-hot Padres. Remember, the Mets swept them, so all the Mets have to do is win one of those 4 games to at least collect the tiebreaker. And then they play 3 games in Arizona where the winner of that series will get the tiebreaker because they're 2-2 head-to-head. And then the trip ends in Chicago against the White Sox. So the Mets right now are about to embark on a stretch in which they are going to play 19 road games and 9 home games leading up until Labor Day. 19 on the road, 9 at home. Now, the Mets have been a better road team. Hopefully they keep that up. You've heard some of the teams on the schedule. It's not a lot of great teams. The Colorado Rockies are not a great team. The St. Louis Cardinals have cooled off. The Anaheim, what are the Angels doing, by the way? We just saw this active trade deadline. They had their finger up their tuchus. What were they doing? So it begins a very, very tough stretch, but it's been tough looking at the results over the last few days and seeing how the Mets, despite winning, weren't gaining any ground. Now, thank you to the New York Yankees if you are a believer and a dreamer about continuing to think about the National League East. The Mets didn't lose a game. They're 8 games out. So within relative striking distance of the National League East. Do I think the Mets are going to win the NL East? No. Do I think they're going to pull closer than 5 games? Probably not. But those are the numbers, keep it in mind. As far as the trade deadline is concerned, it's crazy to think about the numbers. 16 teams acquired 29 relievers. 10 teams acquired 14 starters. There were 19 buyers. There were 11 sellers. And then you had a handful of teams that were trying to do a little bit of both. This was such a complete seller's market. And that's why, even with an extra day to think about it, I am very happy with what the Mets did. And I'm almost now relieved about what the Mets did because I like this team. I think this team has a chance to make the postseason. That opinion has stayed firm now for a few months. I guess it took a little bit of a hit at 11 games under 500. But if you recall, going back to March, I had a view that this team could make the playoffs, not win the division, not be a 95-win team, but be good, be decent. And I think I would have been in pain if they took top prospects in a year that feels like, yeah, we're fun, you never know. Let's see what happens, and used it to acquire guys that are not that good. That would have been tough. That would have been a very tough pill to swallow. So we got the debut of Huascar Brazaban on Wednesday afternoon. Quality reliever. Is he better than a lot of what the Mets had this season? Yes, I think so. Give David Stearns credit for this. When you look at the Met bullpen, he has completely turned it over from the start of the season. There's a few guys that are still there, a few stragglers that are still there. I don't know how much longer they're going to last, like Adam Ottavino. Like, if I had to guess right now, I don't think Adam Ottavino is going to make it to the rest of the season. We see two completely different lefty relievers in this bullpen now, with Alex Young and Danny Young. You've got Phil Maton, who's been reasonably good since the Mets acquired him. We did see Phil Maton allow a run in this game against Minnesota, but whatever. They were losing the game anyway. We see them add Ryan Stanek. Still, the jury is out on him. Much better in his second performance than his first performance. You have Jose Budo fully transitioned now into a bullpen arm. We mentioned Brazaban. And look, they've got arms potentially coming back. So that's the bullpen today. We saw Tyler McGill pitch Wednesday afternoon out of the bullpen. My gut tells me, really that bullpen spot, once Blackburn is activated to make that start on Friday night, someone's going down. And to me, it's either Danny Young or Tyler McGill. It's probably Tyler McGill for now because he just threw a couple of innings. But I am still intrigued by what McGill could be out of the bullpen. But think about it. All those arms I just mentioned, that's the current crop of Met relievers. Then you throw in Sean Reed-Foley's already on rehab assignment. So what are we, a couple of days away from Sean Reed-Foley? Reed Garrett, according to Carlos Mendoza, is going to begin a rehab assignment over the weekend. So what are we, a week away potentially from Reed Garrett? And then you keep your fingers crossed on Dednell Nunez potentially coming back. So you could be seeing 3 guys added to this bullpen, and that's why I lean towards Adam Ottavino's pitching for his baseball livelihood in New York. Phil Maton is safe. Edwin Diaz is safe. Jose Budo is safe. Ryan Stanek is safe. Huascar Brazaban is safe. Alex Young, I don't know if he's safe, but you want to have a lefty out of the bullpen if Danny Young goes down. So this bullpen competition is going to continue, and I kind of like it. I like it, and David Stearns was asked this at his post-game or post-trade deadline press conference, which is, hey, is your strategy in building a bullpen to have just quantity over quality? And his answer was, well, we want quality, but doesn't hurt to have a lot of arms. I mean, I'll say it. Relievers are so volatile. Relievers are so up and down that I like this strategy. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't mean all these guys are going to be in the circle of trust. But I love the fact that he's just throwing a ton of relievers out there and hoping a couple of them stick. Because that's really what you need. You need a few of them to stick. But this goes back to this offense. If the Mets are going to survive this West Coast trip, if the Mets are going to survive the gauntlet in August of 19 of 28 being on the road, if the Mets are going to make the playoffs, which if we're all being honest with ourselves right now, them making the playoffs is a coin toss. That's what it is. I'm not saying it's unlikely. I'm not saying it's a lock. It's neither. It's a freaking coin toss. It's the presidential election. Who the hell knows what's going to happen? We may get a September surprise. But if they're going to make the playoffs, they have to hit. That is the ultimate. Now, we'll get to some of your emails coming up, the ricob@gmail.com. We also like to hear from you via voice. We have a voicemail number. That number is 725-222-8699. So, Pete, let us hear a random Rico Brogna voicemailer.
After the Mets lost the first game to the Phillies in London, we were 17 and a half games back of the Phillies. And now, after the Mets blow out the Twins 15-2, the Yankees blow out the Phillies, the Mets are red hot, the Phillies are ice cold. Well, 17 and a half in less than 2 months has now become 9. Here come the Mets. Down go the Phillies. I love it.
I think we all love it, but let's ask ourselves a question and try to give an honest answer. Do we think, not that the Mets are going to win the division, forget that. That'd be amazing. Do we think the Mets get to September with a big 4-game series in Philadelphia, okay, September 13th, September 14th, and September 15th? That's the 3-game series in Philly. I apologize. And then a few days later, they have a 4-game series against the Phillies. So the Mets have a stretch of games where 7 of 10 are against the Philadelphia Phillies, right? Do we believe going into that stretch, the Mets are within? Because I think to have it be a real pennant race, like a real pennant race, 7 of 10, realistic shot to catch him, I'd have to say you're within 4. I think any more than that, you're asking a lot. Don't tell me, well, you play him 7 times, Evan. Beat him all 7 times. You're not beating him all 7 times. I mean, that's very unlikely to happen. Beating him 6 out of 7 times is very unlikely to happen. 5 out of 7, okay. And that's why if you're 4 games out, you win 5 out of 7, and everything else is even, now you're within a game. So the question I ask you, will the Mets be within, let's say, 5 games of the National League East going into the stretch of games beginning on September 13th? Because that's what you dream of. Like, having that division just be like a realistic kind of possibility. It doesn't, like, it's more realistic today. You're right. They've gained a lot of ground on them. There's no doubt. The math is the math. They are now within 8 games. In London, they were 17 and a half games out. So to pick up 9.5 games, pretty damn good. And it would be historic if the Mets could somehow win this division. But I ask you, Pete, we've got a month and a few weeks before those stretch of games against Philly. They don't play them in August. Those are their final 7 games that they will play against Philly. They've played them 6 times. 7 of 10 in the middle to late September. Do you think the Mets will be within 5 games of the NL East when they play them?
I no, but I want to think they will. But it's tough to say that. I realistically, no, I don't think it's possible. I think they played a hell of, they're going to make the playoffs still. I still feel comfortable with that. But to win the NL East, to be that close, difficult. They do have a couple teams in front of them right now that they're going to play against, the Angels and the Rockies, that I feel that they could sweep both those series.
Wow. You know, they could. Will they? I mean, the Mets have struggled so much against the teams they're supposed to be. Look what the Marlins have done to them this year. I mean, the one thing that scares me more than even thinking about the Phillies in September is beating the teams you're supposed to beat, because the Mets haven't exactly made that easy on themselves the last couple of years.
When did we play the White Sox? Did we play them already?
No, play them at the end of August. It's the weekend going into Labor Day. So they've got this big West Coast trip coming up. They come home for 9 games. Then they have that second big West Coast trip where they go to San Diego and they go to Arizona, and then they wrap it up in Chicago against the White Sox, where you just know they're not sweeping them. They will somehow lose a game to the Chicago White Sox, and that'll be the difference between the White Sox matching and surpassing the 1962 Mets. But that's for next month. We got a long way to go. Let's get to some of your emails. Brian Smith writes, Stearns failed to thread the needle. Well, let's see what he means. Hey, guys, Evan, I agree with you that David Stearns shouldn't have paid the exorbitant prospect capital prices for starting pitching at the deadline. I feel he should have maximized his leverage and traded Tyler McGill or David Peterson. I commend him for raising the floor or fortifying the team at the margins, but when Trevor Rogers brings back Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers, you need to look into moving your sixth starter, especially given your clear focus to build out the farm system. McGill is under control through 27, Peterson through 26. Teams with better pitching depth would have been all over them. I get your point, and I did have that thought a little bit as we were watching the trade deadline, which is not the Mets should have sold. When you're in a wild card race, when you're in a wild card position, which they were going into the trade deadline, and you have this roster too. Like, there are a lot of veterans on this roster. There's a lot of big talent on this roster. So when you factor that all in, you can't sell. You know, what I had suggested about a month ago wasn't selling. It was, hey, I would trade a surplus starting pitcher to help out my bullpen. That never materialized. It also made less sense as time went on because the Mets starting pitching depth wasn't as deep as it appeared it was going to be a month ago. So I got two things to challenge you back on the maybe they could have sold off McGill or Peterson. Number one, I know Trevor Rogers, who ended up getting traded to the Orioles, is not overly impressive. I know that he hasn't had a really good statistical season since 2021. But I am going to go out on a limb and tell you this. Between his stuff, between his age, between what he did do in 2021, I think that the value on Rodgers was significantly higher than what the value would have been on Tyler McGill. David Peterson, maybe a little different. He is a lefty. He is a little bit older. David is not quite as young as Trevor Rogers. But I also think the Mets sort of need David Peterson, and I'll stick with him more so than McGill. Again, I don't think McGill's value was that high, despite, the urgency teams had to add starting pitchers. They need David Peterson right now because, A, he hasn't been bad. I know we all don't trust him. We all don't love him. He's actually been okay in this rotation. Number two, he's under team control next year. The Mets don't have a lot of starting pitchers under team control next year. Number three, he's a lefty. I think they still believe in him. I think that there's a chance, maybe to the chagrin of many of us, that David Peterson's in the freaking rotation next year. And right now, especially with Sevy coming off this terrible start and the innings continuing to pile up for him, when you look at this Met rotation, David Peterson's probably third on the list right now. Sean Manaea has been great. Jose Quintana has certainly been better. So I don't know if the Mets could have afforded to trade David Peterson, despite, looking around and saying, man, boy, these teams are getting so many good prospects back. Why not us? Jimmy writes, I thought for sure Brett Baty was going to be traded. So now what? It seemed as if the Mets were hiding him in AAA to keep him hitting before the trade deadline. What other rational explanation was there for keeping DJ Stewart on the roster? Now that the deadline has passed, does Brett Baty play a part in 2024? Mark Vientos has clearly cemented himself at third base, and I'd argue it's no longer a priority for Baty to play every day. The Rico covered the many ways Mendy could have used Vientos in the starting lineup to start this season, instead of Stern sending him down to AAA. Doesn't the same arguments now apply to Baty? It's obvious the Mets will be relying on the offense to carry them to the playoffs. And if offenses are streaky, where does Baty fit, or does he fit this season? This comes down to one very important question, a question that I'd love to hear asked of David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza. And that is, where are you in terms of belief that Brett Baty can play second base? And for anybody that says, stop bringing up Brett Baty playing second base, he can't play second base, such a stupid idea, I will just remind you, Brett Baty is playing second base in AAA. He's playing there. So obviously the Mets are testing this out. And they're testing this out because the answer to Jimmy's question, barring injury, barring, JD Martinez missing time, barring Pete Alonso missing time, barring the obvious of Mark Vientos missing time, because all three guys would be replaced for the most part by Brett Baty. The only answer is second base. That's the answer. Second base. Whether it's Jeff McNeil not playing, whether it's Jeff McNeil playing right field, whether it's Jeff McNeil playing left field because Brandon Nimmo's hurt, or Jeff McNeil playing left field and Brandon Nimmo playing center field because Harrison Bader isn't playing. That's the avenue. And by the way, you can find at-bats through that avenue. Jeff McNeil sits once a week. Brett Baty plays. Harrison Bader sits once a week. Brett Baty plays. You see what I'm saying here? Brandon Nimmo sits once. So there are ways for Baty to play and for him to get consistent at-bats. But I'm afraid to tell you, it's via second base. And so it really comes down to he's playing there, but we're not watching him. So I don't know. Is he capable of going out there and playing 6 innings of Major League second base before he's taken out for defense? Scott writes, I don't know if you DVR and watch parts of games that you go to, but I'd be curious to know what you or Hoff, if you're reading this, thought of Edwin Diaz on Tuesday night. Results are results, but his velo and location kind of have me spooked. So I didn't go back and watch it on DVR. There was one moment where I made a comment to the guy I was with, the buddy I was with, Dennis. It was during the Buxton at bat when Diaz came in for the 4-out save where he hung a slider. Because I think he started Buxton with like nothing but fastballs. I think he threw, and the velocity was fine, by the way. I did not notice that being down. It was 97, 98, fine. He did eventually throw Buxton a slider that just hung in the middle of the plate. And he fouled it off, if memory serves correct. That was the only thing that really jumped out at me. I didn't notice his velo being down in the 9th inning. But look, you're right. Results are results. He struck a guy out, got a ground out and a pop-up. But no, nothing really jumped out at me in terms of Diaz struggling other than he threw a ton of fastballs to Buxton and he hung a slider during that at-bat. It was a bad pitch, and Buxton couldn't take advantage of it. Anything jump out with you, Hoff, in Edwin Diaz's 4-out save that would be any kind of red flag?
I didn't really notice anything. I thought, again, like you said, the velocity I thought was pretty solid. That's what I keep on looking at every time when he goes out there is how hard is he throwing? And you know what? Sometimes the one thing I do say is sometimes when he does hit high on the velocity, it's a little wild, but that's everybody, I feel like.
Yeah. James Brewmaster writes, deadline thoughts. Keeping prospects was the right call for now. James writes, when it comes to the trade deadline, one lens I like to look through is the opportunity cost of trading a prospect at the deadline versus waiting until the offseason. What do I mean by that? Given the extreme seller's market at this year's deadline, acquiring someone like Tanner Scott would have cost a package that resembled Drew Gilbert and Brandon Sproat. Yuck. Now fast forward to the offseason. If the Mets decided to make a big splash, that same prospect package could likely headline the acquisition of a much more valuable player. A name like Kyle Tucker, Luis Robert, Tarek Skubal, Garrett Crochet, Sandy Alcantara. These are just examples, but you get the idea. I know patience isn't easy, and it's no guarantee any of these guys mentioned above get traded in the offseason, but a trade package of 2 top 5 prospects would go much further in the offseason than it did during this year's seller's deadline. I like what Stearns did, rounding out the Mets roster without giving up their most valuable assets when the market dynamics are so out of whack. It's a great point, James, and I tried to make a very similar point on the air while arguing with Tiki and others about this trade deadline. When I say I don't want to trade prospects right now, it isn't because I need them in my arms and I need to develop every single prospect. You develop some prospects, you trade other prospects. And yes, those decisions are big in terms of who you are willing to trade and who you're going to trade them for. A big part of why I didn't want to part with a lot of those prospects is exactly what James is talking about. I may part with them during the offseason. I may part with them at next year's trade deadline. And I believe that there will be better players that are more worth it that are out there. And he did a pretty good job of naming guys who could be available. Like, yeah, Luis Robert is probably going to be on the market. You're right. Tarek Skubal is probably going to be on the market. I didn't think he was going to be traded at this deadline. Could he be traded during the offseason? Yeah. Kyle Tucker, I would think, especially if the Astros lose Alex Bregman, they're really going to go all out to re-sign him. But yeah, you never know. I think it's certainly a possibility. So when guys like me or gals like me, I'm not a gal, but people, maybe I am a gal sometimes. When we say we don't want to trade prospects at this trade deadline, it isn't necessarily because we just hog prospects and never want to trade them. It's, I may use it a different time for better options. Leo writes, I agree with you about the deadline deals more than you might think. Oh, that's good. I like that. I agree that despite being 35-17 since the 22-33 start, this was not the time to go all in. But I think that Stearns got more than just lottery tickets. Stearns is a very, very smart guy. Dollars to donuts, he picked up guys who he believes Jeremy Hefner can work with and improve, such as Stanek, who's been terrible. Stern saw something. Mark my words. Watch out, Philly. We're coming. Yeah, I when I say lottery tickets, it's not that David Stearns blindly said, just go get me some relievers and we'll see. It's the volatile nature of what relievers are. They are so up and down that, a guy like Ryan Stanek's actually a really good example because a few years ago, he's pitching like one of the best relievers in baseball. And now he's what? He's having a really tough year. So, yeah, maybe Jeremy Hefner sees something. Maybe the Mets can fix him, much like the Orioles were trying to fix Trevor Rogers. And even when the Mets were linked to Trevor Rogers, my thought was, well, I don't know how much he'll help this year because I don't know how much of an upgrade he is even over Tyler McGill. But that's a project. That's hey, I got him under team control for 2 more years. He's only 27 years old. Why not? AW wanted to first guess Carlos Mendoza from the 2-0 win. That was game 2 of this series. He said Carlos Mendoza had 2 options going into the 8th inning. Stick with Sean Manaea or go to Edwin Diaz for a 6-out save. Option 1 was probably out. Manaea must have told Mendy he was done. Also, Manaea's pitch count was at the point. Was at 96. How often does Sean Manaea throw more than 96 pitches? And the answer is not often. So I agree with you. That wasn't an option. He goes on to say Diaz hasn't pitched in 4 games. The Mets have an off day Thursday. So why Stanek? What has he done to earn any trust? I hope it works out. But even it does, it wasn't a good decision. Obviously, he's emailing this, and I appreciate that, AW, in the midst of the inning. So I was good with that move the other night because I think you have to challenge some of these newer guys. You've got to give them that opportunity. Yeah, Ryan Stanek was bad on Sunday. Of course, he came in, he lit fire on a bad situation. It was awful. I thought that situation in the 8th, bottom of the order, he has a 2-run lead. You have Diaz available for a multi-out save. So if he does get into trouble, you're not letting the whole game get away from you. You have Diaz ready to go. I thought it was perfect. I thought that was a nice spot for him. And I'm not sure how people view Stanek's performance. I thought overall it was really good. He got a ground ball to first base. Pete Alonso made a bad play. He got a fly out. He had an inexcusable walk to Brooks Lee, but then he got Trevor Larnach to fly out. He did a good job. He did a fine job. So I disagree, AW, with the first guess. I think with some of these guys in the bullpen, you got to throw them out there. You got to see what they got. Ralph writes, I'm concerned and puzzled by Francisco Alvarez. Who could forget the disastrous trade deadline night for the Mets last August 1st? Top of the 10th inning in Kansas City, Alvarez hit a 2-run home run that gave the Mets a 6-4 lead, but the bullpen blew the game and they lost in the bottom of the 10th inning. Didn't they lose that game on a balk? I think they lost that game on a game-winning, game-ending balk. Oh, that was a fun Rico to do after that. But Ralph goes on to say that was Alvarez's 21st home run, but ever since that night, his home run pace has been anemic. What are your thoughts? So I have 2 thoughts on that. Number 1, wow, what a game to bring up. You talk about a game that like very few Met fans watched. Because think about it. The trade deadline happens. They've given up. How many Met fans, even some of you diehards, how many people were motivated to watch Mets Royals like the next night or that night? Not many. And they had quite an awful loss. I do remember that. I am like 98% confident they lost that game on a balk in the bottom of the 10th inning or whatever it was. I don't think Alvarez has a power issue. I think Alvarez has proven to be a very streaky offensive player, which a lot of sluggers are. I think his hitting overall has been relatively good this season, despite maybe the lack of the power he showed last year. He's just a very streaky offensive player. I don't think there's any like reason for why his power has gone away. So it really isn't a big concern. I'm glad though he played, because when he missed the first 2 games of the series, him being available Wednesday with that shoulder issue is going to be the real test, but he was good to go. He got robbed of a base hit. Overall, though, he went 0 for 4.
Just to fact check, yeah, there was a walk-off balk. Guess who was on the mound?
Who was on the mound for the walk-off balk? For some reason, it's a guy that was here for 30 seconds. That would be my guess. One of those relievers that was here very, very briefly. Is that accurate?
Well, he's not here anymore, and he just got claimed by a team. Josh Walker.
Oh, the great Josh Walker. Speaking of guys who are available, and I know that the Mets have gone out and they've added a lot of relievers, and we talked about it earlier today here on the Rico, 20 minutes ago here on the Rico, about how many relievers they have, and they've got guys coming back from injury, so they may actually have to make some tough decisions. But a former New York Met, a former World Series champion, a guy, again, you talk about volatility of relievers, 2 years ago was one of the best relievers in baseball. Rafael Montero got released. So I wonder, did the Mets take a flyer on him? His numbers this season are scary bad. Scary bad. His ERA is bad, right? And you hear a 4.70 ERA and you say, oh, okay, that's bad. But a lot of bad ones. Ryan Stanek has a similar ERA. But here's the numbers that really concern me. In Rafael Montero's major league career out of the bullpen, he usually averages about 3.5 walks per 9. This year, it's all the way up to 4.5. If that's not bad enough, last year he averaged 10.6 strikeouts per 9. The year before, 9.6. So you can see between 9 and 10. This year, he is averaging a career low, and it's not even close, 5.4 strikeouts. He has 23 strikeouts in 38 1/3 innings. Very alarming numbers. So I don't know what he has left. He's actually 33 years old now. He's no longer a kid, but he is available. And we do see a lot of this. We see a lot of, the Mets sort of did it with Stanek, where a reliever gets thrown to the wolves because a team's done with them, like the Mets were with Josh Walker. They DFA'd him, like the Mets were with Michael Tonkin 5 times. And then another team sees the gold in that, brings them in thinking we can fix them. Kind of like what the Mets are doing with Ryan Stanek. The only reason the Mariners made him available is because they went out and made aggressive trades to improve their bullpen. So somebody will claim Rafael Montero, but yeah, those numbers jump out at you and they're very, very scary. That's for sure. Paul Blackburn's going to make his first Mets start on Friday. He's going to do it against the Anaheim Angels. I got a tough decision, Hoff. I got a real tough decision. I'm thinking of doing something I've never done before. You ready for this?
What are you, hedging a bet?
No, I've done that. Come on, I've done that a million times. So I'm going away on Friday night, going away for a week. Now, don't worry, Rico listeners. We'll be giving you as many Rico Brognas. It doesn't matter. In fact, I'm going to have to coordinate with Pete on this, but I'm going to North Carolina. I'm going to the beaches. And last year, when I went to the beaches, we did the ever popular Drunken Rico. Okay? I got drunk. Hoff got drunk. We had a drunk Rico. Now, granted, we did that after the Mets had sold their guys off. The games meant nothing. And it was almost, hey, what the hell? It was very popular. People liked it. People want another drunk Rico. So I'm up for it. And we got a lot of options on days. I respect that Pete Hoffman is a hardworking man, so maybe the Monday after Mets Cardinals isn't the best choice for Pete. I have no idea. So I'm going to leave that up to Hoff because I'm on vacation. I'll be drinking whenever you want. But we will present to you a Drunken Rico. But my question to you was, on Friday night, after I do my show, I'm leaving, driving to North Carolina, going right at night. I love driving at night. So I got 3 options. Number one, I can DVR the Met game. And whenever I get to North Carolina at 3:00 in the morning, I can watch the West Coast Met game. Great. Option number 2 is I can just listen to it on the radio. Just listen to it on the radio as I'm driving. Keeps me as a companion, keeps me up. But my third idea, and I've never done this before, is I would listen to the game on the radio, and after every at-bat, I would voice message myself what happened so that when I get to North Carolina, I could score the game based on my voice messages to myself. Hoff, what do you do?
So selfishly speaking, for Rico Brogna purposes, I want a copy of every single voice message you send to yourself. and we will make that an episode.
That would be a horrible episode. 4-3, first out of the inning. Double to left field. 1 RBI. No, I thought about it. I think I'm probably just going to listen to Keith Rad and Pat McCarthy do the game. I assume Howie's not going out to Anaheim. But yeah, I've thought about that because I'm so addicted to scoring. I've got a problem. I've got a scoring addiction. That's my biggest issue.
I would love though to hear your reaction to like a backwards K Jeff McNeil. Like that to me, I would love to see like your tone after every single play.
That is true. Like it'll be almost like a running, commentary of the game based on my tone. But we do Met fans have an off day on Thursday, a chance to take a break, and then they do begin this big West Coast road trip. Again, the opponents aren't great, but the geography is the problem. Blackburn is going to make that first start, Paul Blackburn. I always have like this urge to say Nick Blackburn. He was a pitcher, I think, with the Minnesota Twins a few years ago. But Paul Blackburn, whose first start back from the IL was actually against the Angels, is going to do it again on Friday night. David Peterson's going to pitch on Saturday. Jose Quintana's going to pitch on Sunday. Then they've got that makeup game Monday afternoon, a 5:15 first pitch against the St. Louis Cardinals with Sean Manaea on the mound. And then they begin the series in Colorado against the Rockies. They do have to make a roster decision. My gut is Tyler McGill goes down and they activate Paul Blackburn. And maybe they use Tyler McGill out of the bullpen down in the minor leagues. We shall see. But a very big West Coast trip. Last thing I want to do before this trip begins is give you, Hoff 2, what we need record-wise out of this West Coast trip. Now, as we always say with what our expectations are for a trip, what we would want to have happen, obviously the Mets go 8-0 in their first 10 games, changes the expectations. That always happens. But as we sit here, 36 hours, really, maybe 48 hours before first pitch of the Friday night West Coast game against the Anaheim Angels, they have 10 games. 3 in Anaheim, a game in St. Louis, 3 in Colorado, 3 in Seattle, 10-game road trip. What would be an acceptable performance in the 10 games coming up on this trip? Hoff, do you want to go first, or do you want me to tell you my expectations? Up to you.
Okay, what I want them to do, I think they need to go 7-3, and that's tough. But 7-3 is something that I think they can achieve, and that's not too over the top.
I think your bar is slightly too high. I do. I really do. So my number it's not that far off by any stretch, but it's 6-4. And I'll lay out exactly how I would do it, and it's going to show you how difficult this is going to be. 2 out of 3 against the Angels. So win a series against the Angels. I know they're bad. I know they suck. They should sweep them. It is not easy to just sweep teams, all right? Unless you're the Chicago White Sox. 2-1 against the Angels. Win the St. Louis game. Okay, that St. Louis game is very, very important. It would ensure yourselves a tiebreaker over them. They're still kind of a factor. They are definitely a factor in the NL wildcard race. So that's a big swing game. So win the game against St. Louis. That gets you to 3-1. 2 out of 3 in Colorado against a bad Rocky team. That gets you to 5-2. I then look at the final series on this road trip against a now emerging Mariner team, and I say just win a game. Like, I can't say at the end of a long-ass trip that's taken you from Anaheim to St. Louis to Colorado, boy, they better win 2 out of 3 against Seattle. I think at that point, if you have accomplished what I just laid out, which is win the series in Anaheim, win the game in St. Louis, win the series in Colorado, I would be okay with just getting a win in Seattle, and that gets you to 6-4. And 6-4 has you 8 games above 500 coming back to Citi Field, which would be a very, very, I think that'd be a very good road trip. I'd be very happy with 6-4. Obviously, if they start off 6-0, I won't be happy with 6-4. We always talk about expectations, but I think when you got to think about the geography in this whole thing. They're not robots. They're human beings. 6-4, I'd be pretty happy with.
Well, that's funny because that's why I expect them to 7-3, and I included a loss for St. Louis because that's like a 1-game hit. It's a travel day. it's a pain in the ass. So, and I expect them in Seattle to lose 2 games. So I am over ambitious with the sweeping in LA and Colorado.
I mean, I'd love to see it. I mean, if they're 7-3, I'm having a party. I think 6-4 would be very good. I think 5-5 would be acceptable. I think anything less than that would be a big disappointment because despite it being on the road, despite the geography we talked about, the Angels are not good. I think they're worse than even what their record says. The Rockies are one of the worst teams in the National League. And yeah, St. Louis and Seattle, 4 of those games are against quality teams. So we shall see. But we will give you plenty of Ricos over the course of this West Coast trip. I think what's great about it selfishly is, so I go every year down to North Carolina. We get a house. We hang by the beach. Good family trip. But what I love selfishly is the Mets playing on the West Coast because it doesn't affect anybody. Like I go do the family stuff, and usually, especially when you're on the beach, everybody's asleep by 8 o'clock. Everybody's asleep by 9 o'clock. It's not a late night. So most nights I get to sit there and just watch a West Coast game. And if Pete Hoffman's up, maybe we'll do even more Ricos. Maybe we'll do instant reaction Ricos based on how I know you're going to be up, Hoff. I never doubt you.
I will be, well, except for that one time. I will be up. I will be up. And to be honest with you, depending on how the games go, we may have quite a few drunken Ricos.
Oh, quite a few drunken Ricos. I thought you're working next week. I figured it would be difficult for you. For me, it's easy.
I could still drink and work, right? Is that allowed?
Listen, I guess as long as you get to work and you're fine and you're keeping your show happy, then it doesn't freaking matter.
There you go.
Yeah, but I'll definitely drink once or two. We'll have a drunken Rico. We will let you know what day it'll be. We have not planned it out yet, but it will be at some point during this upcoming week. We appreciate the voicemails, 725-222-8699. Of course, the emails, thericob@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, subscribing to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.